The bullet grazed past Delilah Carson's ear, so close she felt the heat of it against her skin. But her hand never wavered as she drew her father's Colt revolver and fired back at the rattlesnake coiled 6 feet away. The snake's head exploded in a spray of dust and scales, and she stood there in the New Mexico heat of 1882, her heart pounding, remembering every lesson her father had drilled into her before consumption took him 3 months ago. She was 22 years old and alone on the ranch outside Hachita, New Mexico, a town so small it barely deserved the name. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, brown and unforgiving, dotted with mesquite and creosote bushes that somehow survived on next to nothing. Her father, William Carson, had taught her everything he knew about surviving out here. How to shoot, how to track, how to read the land and the sky, how to fight when fighting was the only option left. He had been a Texas Ranger once, before he married her mother and decided to try his hand at ranching. The ranch never made much money, but it had been home, and now it was hers. Delilah holstered her revolver and wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. She needed to check the fence line on the eastern pasture before the sun climbed any higher. The summer heat in this part of New Mexico could kill a person if they were not careful, and she still had work to do before she could retreat to the relative coolness of the adobe house her father had built. She saddled her mare, a gray horse named Smoke, and rode out across the dry grassland. The ranch was small, only 200 acres, with maybe 30 head of cattle that were more trouble than they were worth in this drought. She had been thinking about selling, about moving to El Paso or even further east, but every time she considered it, she heard her father's voice in her head, steady and sure, telling her that Carsons did not run from hard times. The fence line was intact, though she found a place where the wire had come loose from one of the posts. She dismounted and was working on securing it when she heard the sound of approaching horses. 3 riders, coming from the south at an easy pace. She straightened up, her hand moving instinctively to the revolver on her hip, and watched them come. They were rough-looking men, the kind who drifted from place to place looking for easy opportunities. She had seen their type before. The one in front was heavyset with a thick black beard and small, mean eyes. The other 2 flanked him, both lean and hungry-looking. "Well, well," the bearded man said as they pulled up about 20 feet away. "What do we have here? Little girl playing rancher." "This is private property," Delilah said, keeping her voice level. "You are trespassing." The man laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. "You hear that, boys? She says we are trespassing." He looked back at her, his eyes moving over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Where is your husband, girl?" "Your daddy, dead," Delilah said flatly, "and I am asking you to leave." "Maybe we do not want to leave," one of the other men said. He had a scar across his cheek that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. "Maybe we like it here." "Maybe you should be more careful about who you threaten," a new voice said. Delilah's head snapped around. Another rider had appeared, coming from the east, and she had been so focused on the 3 men that she had not heard his approach. He sat easy in the saddle on a tall buckskin horse, his hat pulled low against the sun. He was younger than the other men, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair and dark eyes and a face that was handsome in a hard, weathered way. He wore a gun belt with a well-maintained revolver, and there was something about the way he carried himself that spoke of competence and danger. "This is not your concern, friend," the bearded man said, but there was a note of caution in his voice now. "I am making it my concern," the stranger said. He looked at Delilah, and something passed between them in that look, a recognition, an understanding. "Madam, are these men bothering you?" "They were just leaving," Delilah said. "Were we?" the scarred man asked, his hand moving toward his gun. The stranger's revolver was out before the scarred man's fingers touched his holster. The movement was so fast Delilah almost missed it. "Yes," the stranger said quietly. "You were." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the bearded man spat into the dust and jerked his head at his companions. "Come on, this place is not worth the trouble." They turned their horses and rode south, back the way they had come. Delilah watched them until they disappeared into the heat shimmer, then looked at the stranger. He had holstered his gun and was studying her with interest. "Thank you," she said. "Though I had the situation under control." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I am sure you did. I am Tobias Sullivan. Most people call me Toby. Delilah Carson." He touched the brim of his hat. "Pleasure, Miss Carson. You live out here alone, I manage." "I am sure you do." He glanced at the fence she had been repairing. "You need a hand with that." She should have said no. She should have sent him on his way, thanked him politely and firmly, and gone back to her work. But there was something about him that made her hesitate, something in his eyes that was not like the other men. Something honest. "If you have got the time," she said. He dismounted and tied his horse next to Smoke. Up close, she could see that his clothes were trail-worn but clean, and his hands, when he took the wire from her, were calloused and capable. They worked in silence for a few minutes, and she found herself stealing glances at him, noting the way the muscles in his forearms flexed as he worked, the concentration on his face. "You are not from around here," she said finally. "Texas, originally. Been drifting for a while." He finished securing the wire and straightened up. "Looking for work, actually. You know anyone around here who might be hiring?" "Depends on what kind of work you are looking for." "Honest work. Ranch work, cattle work, whatever needs doing." She looked at him for a long moment, weighing the risk. She needed help, that was true enough. The ranch was too much for one person, especially during the summer. But taking on a stranger was dangerous, particularly for a woman alone. "I might have work," she said slowly. "Room and board plus $30 a month, but I need to know you are trustworthy." "How do you plan to determine that?" he asked, and there was amusement in his voice but also genuine curiosity. "My father taught me to read people," she said, "and to fight if I read them wrong." Did he now? Tobias looked at her with increased interest. "What else did your father teach you?" "Everything he knew. Shooting, tracking, fighting. He was a Texas Ranger before he settled down." "William Carson," Tobias said suddenly. "I heard stories about him. Fast draw, fair man, hell on outlaws." "You knew him?" "Never met him, but his reputation reached Texas. If you are his daughter, I am guessing you inherited more than just his ranch." "Show me," she said impulsively. He raised an eyebrow. "Show you what you know?" "My father always said you could tell a man's character by the way he fights." She stepped back, her hand resting on her revolver. "Show me what you know, and I will show you what my father taught me." Tobias grinned, a real grin that lit up his whole face and made him look younger. "You want to have a shooting contest. Here, now, not shooting, fighting, hand to hand, unless you are afraid a woman might get the better of you." "I am not afraid," he said, "but I do not want to hurt you." "You will not," she said with confidence. He studied her for a moment, then nodded and took off his gun belt, setting it carefully on a fence post. She did the same, then moved into the open space between the fence and the horses. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, steady and instructive. "Watch his eyes, not his hands. Balance is everything. Use his strength against him." Tobias circled her slowly, and she mirrored his movement, staying light on her feet. He was bigger than her, stronger, with longer reach, but she had advantages too. She was faster, more flexible, and she had been taught by one of the best fighters Texas had ever produced. He came in fast, testing her, a straight jab that she slipped easily. She countered with a strike to his ribs that he blocked, but just barely. They broke apart, circled again. She could see the reassessment in his eyes, the realization that she was not playing. "Your father taught you well," he said. "I am not done showing you yet." This time she initiated, feinting high and going low, sweeping his leg. He stumbled but did not fall, catching himself and grabbing for her arm. She twisted out of his grip, using his own momentum to pull him off balance, and suddenly he was on the ground on his back and she was standing over him, breathing hard. "Yield?" she asked. He laughed, a genuine sound of surprise and delight. "Yes, madam, I yield." She offered him a hand and pulled him to his feet. "You have got good instincts," she said, "but your footwork needs improvement." "Is that part of the job?" he asked, brushing dust off his pants. "Fighting lessons from the boss, might be," she said. "If you want the job." "I do," he said, meeting her eyes. "And not just because you just put me on my back in under a minute." There was something in his gaze that made her pulse quicken, but she pushed the feeling aside. "Then you start tomorrow, sunrise, do not be late." "Where should I bunk?" "There is an old bunkhouse on the north side of the ranch. It is not much, but it has got a roof and a bed. You can stay there." "Sounds perfect." He retrieved his gun belt and buckled it back on. "Miss Carson, I have got a feeling this is going to be interesting." "Call me Delilah," she said. "And you have got no idea." She watched him ride north toward the bunkhouse, then finished her fence work and headed back to the main house. As she unsaddled Smoke and brushed her down, she found herself thinking about the way Tobias had moved, the way he had laughed when she bested him, the genuine respect in his eyes. Most men would have been angry or embarrassed. He had been impressed. She made dinner for herself, beans and cornbread, and ate alone at the table her father had built. The house felt emptier than usual tonight, and she found herself wondering what Tobias was doing, whether he had food, whether the bunkhouse was too uncomfortable. She pushed the thoughts away and focused on planning the next day's work. The cattle needed to be moved to the north pasture, where there was still some decent grazing. The well pump needed to be checked. The roof of the barn had a leak that needed patching before the monsoon season started. She fell asleep thinking about all the work ahead, but her dreams were full of dark eyes and a slow smile. Tobias was waiting by the corral when she came out at dawn, already saddled and ready to go. His horse, which he told her was named Buck, was a fine animal, well cared for despite the obvious signs of long travel. "Morning," he said, touching his hat. "What is first?" "Moving cattle," she said. "Can you rope?" "Well enough." They spent the morning rounding up the small herd and driving them north. It was hot, dusty work, and by midday they were both soaked with sweat. Tobias proved to be a competent cattleman, quick to anticipate problems and good with the animals. He also proved to be easy company, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh more than she had in months. "So what made you leave Texas?" she asked as they paused to let the cattle rest and drink at a water hole. "Long story," he said, then seemed to reconsider. "Actually, not that long. I worked for a ranch outside San Antonio. Good place, good people. But the owner's son took a dislike to me, accused me of stealing, which I did not do. I left before it turned ugly." "Why did he accuse you?" "Because I was courting a girl he fancied," Tobias said. "And she preferred me. He could not stand it." "What happened to the girl?" "She married a shopkeeper," he said with a shrug. "I was not settling down material, or so she told me." "Are you settling down material?" He looked at her, and there was something serious in his expression. "I did not think so. But lately I have been wondering if maybe I just had not found the right reason to settle." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Delilah could not quite name. Then one of the cows lowed loudly, breaking the spell, and they went back to work. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Tobias proved himself to be hardworking, reliable, and good company. He fixed the barn roof and the well pump, helped her mend more fence, and worked long hours without complaint. In the evenings, after the work was done, she found herself inviting him to the main house for dinner more and more often. They would sit on the porch as the desert cooled, talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories about his travels, about the places he had seen and the people he had met. She told him about her father, about growing up on the ranch, about her mother who had died when Delilah was 12. He never remarried, Tobias asked one night. No. He said my mother was his one great love, and he was not interested in finding another. Delilah stared out at the darkening sky. I used to think that was romantic. Now I wonder if it was just lonely. Maybe it was both, Tobias said quietly. She looked at him and found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Maybe. One evening, a month after he had arrived, 3 men rode up to the ranch just as the sun was setting. Delilah recognized them immediately as the same men who had threatened her before. The bearded one, whose name she had learned was Cyrus Monk, looked even meaner than she remembered. "We heard you hired on some help," Monk called out as Delilah and Tobias came out onto the porch. "Thought we would come back and make you another offer." "I am not interested in any offers from you," Delilah said coldly. "You should be," Monk said. "This is not good land for a woman alone. Well, a woman and one hired hand. We are offering good money for your property, more than it is worth, frankly. And if I refuse, then things might get difficult for you," Monk said. "Accidents happen out here, fences get cut, cattle go missing, buildings catch fire." Tobias stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun. "You are threatening her." "Just stating facts," Monk said with a nasty smile. "You seem like a smart fellow. Maybe you can talk some sense into your boss." "My boss," Tobias said evenly, "is one of the smartest, toughest people I have ever met, and if you threaten her again, you will be dealing with me." "That is supposed to scare us?" the scarred man asked. 3 against 1, 3 against 2, Delilah said, stepping up beside Tobias. "And I promise you, you do not want this fight." Monk looked between them, then spat into the dirt. "You have got a week to think about our offer. After that, we stop being polite." They rode off into the gathering darkness. Delilah let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "They are going to be trouble." "I know," Tobias said, "but we will handle it." He looked at her, and in the fading light his eyes were dark and serious. "I am not going anywhere, Delilah, not unless you tell me to go." "I do not want you to go," she said softly. "Good." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Because I have not wanted to leave since the day I met you." Her heart was pounding, but she made herself ask the question. "Why did you really stop to help me that day? You could have ridden on." "I saw a woman who needed help," he said. "And then I saw a woman who was strong and brave and beautiful, and I knew I wanted to know her better." "Was that wrong of me?" "No," she whispered. "It was not wrong." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she did not want to pull away. She wanted this, had wanted it for weeks if she was honest with herself. When his lips met hers, it was soft and gentle and perfect. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating as fast as her own. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Delilah Carson." "I am falling in love with you too, Tobias Sullivan." They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, and for the first time since her father died, Delilah felt like she was not alone. The next morning, they found that someone had cut the fence on the south pasture and driven off 5 head of cattle. Tobias and Delilah tracked them to a box canyon 10 miles south, where they found the cattle and evidence of a camp. The tracks led back toward town. "Monk and his men," Delilah said, her jaw tight with anger. "We should report this to the sheriff," Tobias said. "The sheriff is useless," Delilah replied. "He barely leaves his office unless there is a murder involved, and even then it depends on who got murdered." "Then what do you want to do?" She looked at him, then at the tracks, then back at him. "I want to make sure they understand that I am not selling and I am not scared. That could be dangerous." "Everything out here is dangerous," she said. "But my father did not teach me to back down, and I am not starting now." They drove the cattle back to the ranch and secured them in the corral, then rode into Hachita. The town consisted of one dusty main street with a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and a handful of other buildings that looked like they might blow away in a strong wind. They found Monk and his men in the saloon, drinking and playing cards. The room went quiet when Delilah walked in. Women did not generally frequent saloons, but she did not care. She walked straight up to Monk's table, Tobias a step behind her. "You stole my cattle," she said flatly. Monk looked up at her with mock surprise. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Yes, you do. I am giving you one chance to leave me alone. Take it." "Or what?" Monk asked, standing up. He was a big man, and he used his size to try to intimidate her, looming over her. "What are you going to do, little girl?" "She is not going to do anything," Tobias said. "I am." Monk looked past Delilah to Tobias. "You really want to do this, boy, if I have to." For a moment, Delilah thought it was going to turn into a gunfight right there in the saloon. But then a voice from the doorway said, "That is enough." A man in his 50s with a marshal's badge pinned to his vest walked into the saloon. He had iron gray hair and a weathered face, and there was authority in every line of his body. "Monk, you and your boys get out. I have heard about your little protection scheme, and it ends now." "We are just playing cards, Marshal," Monk said. "You are leaving," the marshal said flatly. "Now, and if I hear about any more cattle going missing from the Carson ranch, I am coming for you." Monk looked like he wanted to argue, but something in the marshal's face stopped him. He and his men collected their money and left, pushing past Delilah and Tobias on their way out. The marshal turned to Delilah. "You are William Carson's girl." "Yes, sir. I knew your father." "Good man." "I am sorry for your loss." He offered his hand. "Marshal James Garrett. I have been tracking some rustlers through this territory, and Monk's name came up more than once. I will make sure he does not bother you again." "Thank you," Delilah said, shaking his hand. Garrett looked at Tobias. "You are the hired hand." "Yes, sir." "Taking good care of her, doing my best," Tobias said, and Delilah felt her cheeks warm at the implication in his words. Garrett smiled slightly. "Good. William was a friend of mine. I would hate to think his daughter was not being looked after properly." He tipped his hat. "You have any more trouble, you let me know. I will be in the area for a few more weeks." After he left, Delilah and Tobias walked out into the afternoon sun. She felt lighter than she had in days, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "Well," Tobias said. "That went better than expected." "Much better." She looked at him. "Thank you for backing me up in there." "Always," he said simply. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence. That evening after dinner they sat on the porch again, closer together than before. Tobias had his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, feeling safe and content. "Tell me something," she said. "When you were traveling, did you ever think about settling down? Before you met me, I mean." "Sometimes," he admitted. "But it always seemed like something for other people, not for me. I never felt like I belonged anywhere. And now," he turned to look at her, his eyes soft in the lamplight, "now I think I finally found where I belong." She kissed him, slow and deep, and felt him respond with equal passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she said, "Stay with me tonight, not in the bunkhouse. Here." "Are you sure?" he asked, searching her face. "I am sure." He stood and offered her his hand, and she took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They went inside together, and she led him to her bedroom. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies in the soft darkness. Afterward, she lay with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, and felt more complete than she had ever felt in her life. "Marry me," he said suddenly. She lifted her head to look at him. "What, marry me?" he repeated. "I know it is fast, and I do not have much to offer except my word that I will love you and take care of you for the rest of my life. But I do not want to waste time, Delilah. Life is too short and too uncertain out here. I love you, and I want to spend whatever time we have together as your husband." She felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her up for a kiss that was both celebratory and promise-filled. They stayed awake late into the night, making plans and dreaming about the future. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Hatcheta. Marshall Garrett served as a witness, along with the owner of the general store, a kindly woman named Mrs. Patterson who had known Delilah since she was a child. Delilah wore her mother's wedding dress, which she had kept carefully preserved in a trunk, and Tobias wore a new suit that they had bought from the general store. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Tobias kissed her, Delilah felt her father's presence like a benediction, as if he was smiling down on them. They held a small reception at the ranch, with neighbors and a few townspeople who came out to celebrate. It was not fancy, but it was warm and genuine, and Delilah found herself laughing more than she had in years. As the sun began to set and the guests started to leave, Tobias pulled her aside. "I have got something for you," he said. He led her to the barn, where he had been working on something in secret for the past week. Inside, he had built a beautiful set of shelves and a gun case. "For your father's guns and things," he said. "I thought you might want a proper place to keep them." She was crying again, but this time she did not care. "It is perfect," she whispered. "You are perfect." "Not perfect," he said with a smile, "but I am yours." That night they lay together in their bed, her bed that was now their bed, and talked about everything they wanted for their future. They would expand the ranch, add more cattle, maybe some horses. They would build a better bunkhouse in case they needed to hire more help someday. They would raise a family, children who would grow up learning to love the land the way Delilah did, learning to be strong and capable the way her father had taught her. "How many children?" Tobias asked, running his fingers through her hair. "At least 3, she said. "Maybe 4. "I always wanted brothers and sisters." 3 or 4 sounds good to me," he agreed. "And I am going to teach them everything I know, just like your father taught you." "We will teach them together," she said. "Everything they need to know to survive and thrive out here." The months that followed were hard work, but happy. They expanded the herd, buying 10 more head of cattle from a rancher who was retiring and moving back east. Tobias proved to be an excellent judge of livestock, and under his guidance, their small ranch began to prosper. The monsoons came in July, bringing much-needed rain, and the grazing improved significantly. Marshall Garrett stopped by one day in August to tell them that Monk and his men had been arrested for rustling and would be spending the next 10 years in the territorial prison. "You should not have any more trouble from them," he said. "Thank God," Delilah said, "and thank you for everything you have done." "Your father would have done the same for me," Garrett said. He looked between Delilah and Tobias, noting the easy affection between them, the way they stood close together. "William would have liked you," he said to Tobias. "You are a good man. Take care of his girl." "Always," Tobias promised. As summer turned to fall, Delilah began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was sure before telling Tobias, choosing a quiet evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "I have got something to tell you," she said. He looked at her, immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right," she said with a smile. "I am pregnant." For a moment he just stared at her, and then a huge grin spread across his face. "Really? Are you sure?" "I am sure." He let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. When he set her down, he was more careful, his hands gentle on her waist. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly, "and I am going to be a mother." "We are going to be parents," he said, and kissed her with such tenderness it made her heart ache. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Tobias became almost comically protective, insisting she rest more, do less physical work. She protested at first, but as her belly grew, she found she was grateful for his care. They spent the long winter evenings planning the nursery, which they set up in the small room next to their bedroom. Tobias built a beautiful cradle out of pine, carving small horses into the headboard. "For a cowboy or cowgirl," he said with a grin. Their son was born in late March on a warm spring day when the desert was blooming with wildflowers. The birth was long and difficult, but Delilah was strong, and Mrs. Patterson, who had experience as a midwife, was there to help. When she finally held her baby boy in her arms, exhausted but elated, she looked up at Tobias and saw tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Tobias whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. The baby immediately gripped his finger, and Tobias laughed through his tears. "Look at that grip. He is going to be strong." They named him William, after Delilah's father, with the middle name Thomas, after Tobias's father who had died when Tobias was young. Little William was a healthy baby with a good set of lungs and his father's dark eyes. The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless joy. Tobias proved to be a natural father, patient and loving. He would walk William around the ranch for hours when the baby was fussy, pointing out the horses and cattle, telling him stories about the land. "He is too young to understand," Delilah said with amusement one day, watching them from the porch. "But he is listening," Tobias insisted, "and someday he will remember." When William was 6 months old, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again. Tobias was overjoyed, though also concerned about how much work she was taking on. "We will manage," she assured him. "We always do." Their daughter was born the following spring, another healthy baby with Delilah's green eyes and a full head of dark hair. They named her Clara, after Tobias's mother. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 small children. The ranch continued to prosper, and they were able to hire another hand, a young man named Peter who was hardworking and trustworthy. With his help, Tobias and Delilah were able to focus more on their growing family while still keeping the ranch running smoothly. William grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere. By the time he was 3, he was already learning to ride, sitting in front of Tobias on Buck's saddle. Clara was quieter, more observant, but just as interested in the ranch and the animals. One evening, when William was 4 and Clara was 2, they all sat on the porch together watching the sunset. William was on Tobias's lap, and Clara was on Delilah's, and they were teaching the children the names of the birds that were singing their evening songs. "Are you happy?" Tobias asked Delilah quietly. She looked at him, at her husband with their son on his lap, then down at her daughter who was drowsing against her chest, then out at the land that had been her father's and was now theirs, and she smiled. "I am happier than I ever thought possible." "Me too," he said. "Me too." As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow. They expanded their holdings, buying the adjoining property when it came up for sale, and their herd grew to over 100 head. They built a larger house with more bedrooms, knowing they would need the space. They had 2 more children, both boys. Michael was born when William was 6 and Clara was 4, and then 3 years later came Daniel. The house was loud and chaotic and full of love. Delilah taught all of her children the skills her father had taught her. She showed them how to shoot, how to track, how to read the weather and the land. She taught them to be strong and capable and never to back down from what was right. Tobias taught them to be kind and fair and to value honest work. Together, they raised 4 children who were as much a part of the New Mexico desert as the mesquite and creosote. William grew up to be tall and serious like his grandfather, with a natural gift for working with cattle. Clara was fiery and independent, the best shot of all the children. Michael was gentle and artistic, always drawing pictures of the ranch and the animals. Daniel was the youngest and the wildest, always getting into scrapes and adventures. One summer evening, when William was 16 and starting to court the daughter of a neighboring rancher, Delilah and Tobias sat on the porch alone for the first time in weeks. The children were all occupied with various tasks and activities, giving them a rare moment of peace. "Can you believe it has been 15 years since we met?" Tobias asked, reaching over to take her hand. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Delilah said, "and sometimes it feels like forever. Do you remember when you asked me to show you what I knew and you put me on my back in the dirt?" She laughed. "I remember you yielding very gracefully. I knew right then you were special," he said. "I think I started falling in love with you that very day." "I was already falling," she admitted, "from the moment you showed up and faced down Monk and his men without hesitation." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Best decision I ever made, stopping to help you that day. Best decision I ever made was asking you to stay." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The desert evening was cooling, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. "I have been thinking," Tobias said slowly. "William is old enough now to take on more responsibility around the ranch, and Peter has been with us for so long he is practically family. What are you suggesting?" "That maybe we could take a trip, just the 2 of us. Go to San Antonio or even as far as New Orleans, see some things we have never seen." Delilah felt a flutter of excitement. "Leave the ranch, just for a few weeks. William can handle things here with Peter and Clara to help. Do not get me wrong, I love our life and our children, but I would like to have some time with just my wife. Remind ourselves who we were before we were parents." "I would like that," Delilah said. "I would like that very much." They made the trip that fall, taking the train from El Paso to San Antonio and then on to New Orleans. It was Delilah's first time seeing a city, and the noise and crowds overwhelmed her at first. But Tobias was patient, guiding her through the chaos, showing her the beautiful architecture, the music, the food, the culture that was so different from their desert home. They stayed in a real hotel with gas lighting and indoor plumbing, luxuries Delilah had only heard about. They ate in restaurants and went to the theater and walked along the Mississippi River in the evenings. It was magical and strange and wonderful, but after 2 weeks, they were both ready to go home. As the train carried them back west, back toward New Mexico and the desert, Delilah felt her heart lift. "There is no place like home," she said, watching the landscape change outside the window. "No place," Tobias agreed, his arm around her shoulders. They arrived back at the ranch to find everything running smoothly. William had handled his responsibilities well, and there had been no major problems. The children were excited to hear about their parents' adventures, clustering around them and demanding stories and descriptions. Life continued its steady rhythm. William married the neighboring rancher's daughter, a sweet girl named Sarah, when he was 19. They built a small house on the Carson property and started their own family, giving Delilah and Tobias their first grandchild, a little girl named Lucy. Clara, independent as ever, announced at 20 that she was not interested in marriage and was instead going to start her own business breeding and training horses. Tobias and Delilah supported her decision, helping her set up a small operation on the eastern edge of their property. She proved to have her mother's determination and her father's skill with animals, and her business thrived. Michael went east to study art in St. Louis, sending home letters full of descriptions of the city and his studies. Daniel stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father and learning the business. As Delilah and Tobias moved into their 40s, they found themselves settling into a comfortable middle age. They still worked the ranch, though not as hard as they once had. They had more time to simply enjoy each other's company, to ride out into the desert in the cool of evening, to sit on the porch and watch their grandchildren play. One day, as they were riding back from checking on the north pasture, Delilah pulled her horse to a stop at the same spot where she had first fought Tobias all those years ago. The fence post was still there, weathered but standing. "You remember?" she asked. Tobias smiled. "How could I forget? You showed me what you knew and I fell in love." "The cowboy said, 'Show me what you know,'" she said softly, remembering that moment, the challenge in his eyes, the way everything had changed from that point forward. "And you did," he said. "You showed me strength and courage and heart. You showed me what it meant to be truly alive." She reached across the space between their horses and took his hand. "We have built a good life, the best life," he agreed, "and it all started right here." They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, the desert sunset painting everything in gold. The house came into view, larger now, with smoke rising from the chimney and the sound of children's laughter carrying on the wind. Their children and grandchildren were there, family gathering for Sunday dinner as they did every week. As they unsaddled their horses and walked toward the house together, Delilah felt a profound sense of gratitude and peace. Her father had taught her to fight, to survive, to be strong. But Tobias had taught her to love, to trust, to build something lasting and real. They entered the house to the chaos and warmth of family. William and Sarah were setting the table while little Lucy tried to help. Clara was telling Daniel a story about a particularly stubborn horse she was training. Michael had come home from St. Louis for a visit and was showing them his latest paintings, vibrant depictions of the desert landscape. Dinner was loud and joyful, everyone talking over each other, sharing stories and news. Tobias sat at the head of the table with Delilah at his side, and they looked at each other over the noise and activity, sharing a private smile that held decades of love and partnership. After dinner, after the dishes were washed and put away, after the children had taken the grandchildren home to bed, Delilah and Tobias walked out to the porch one more time. The stars were brilliant in the clear desert sky, and the night was full of the sounds of the land they loved. No regrets. Tobias asked, pulling her close. "Not a single one," Delilah said. "You? Only that I did not meet you sooner," he said. "But then again, maybe everything happened exactly when it was supposed to." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "My father used to say that the right person comes along when you need them most, not when you want them. He was a wise man. He would have liked you," she said. "He would have been proud of the life we built together." They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the stars wheel slowly across the sky. The ranch was quiet around them, settled for the night. Their children were safe and happy, building lives of their own. Their grandchildren were healthy and bright. The land was prosperous. The cattle were thriving, and the future looked as wide and promising as the desert horizon. Delilah thought back to that day so many years ago when Tobias had ridden up and changed her life forever. She thought about her father's teachings, about the strength and courage he had instilled in her, about how all of that had prepared her for the moment when she would need to trust someone, to let someone in, to fight alongside someone instead of alone. Her father had taught her to fight, and she had spent her whole life fighting to survive, fighting to keep the ranch, fighting against loneliness and fear. But Tobias had taught her something equally important. He had taught her when to stop fighting and start living. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "And I love you," Tobias replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You are my heart, Delilah. You are everything." They kissed under the stars, the same stars that had watched over them for all these years, that would continue to watch over their children and grandchildren and all the generations to come. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of sage and creosote, the eternal smell of home. As they finally went inside, Tobias's arm around Delilah's waist, they passed the gun case he had built all those years ago as a wedding gift. Inside were her father's revolvers, carefully maintained, along with a collection of other firearms they had accumulated over the years. But there was something else there too, something Delilah had added years ago, a small placard with words engraved on it. She learned to fight from her father's teachings, it read. The cowboy said, "Show me what you know," and in showing him she found love. It was their story, boiled down to its essence. A story of survival and strength, of challenge and trust, of two people finding each other against all odds in the vast emptiness of the New Mexico desert. A story that had started with a test of skill and had bloomed into a partnership that had lasted a lifetime. They went to bed that night as they had every night for over 20 years, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for another day together. And as sleep claimed them, they both dreamed of the same thing, of a young woman with fire in her eyes facing down a cowboy with a slow smile, of the moment when everything changed, of the beginning of forever. The years continued to roll by like the desert wind, constant and inevitable. Delilah and Tobias grew older together, their dark hair turning silver, their faces gaining lines that spoke of years spent outdoors, of laughter and love and hard work. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew deeper, richer, more profound with each passing year. They watched their children grow into middle age themselves, watched their grandchildren become adults and start families of their own. The ranch that had started as 200 acres and 30 head of cattle had grown into one of the most successful operations in southern New Mexico, spanning over 2,000 acres with hundreds of head of cattle and a thriving horse breeding program. But despite the success, despite the growth and change, some things remained constant. The adobe house her father had built still stood at the heart of it all, though it had been expanded and improved over the years. The gun case Tobias had made still held her father's revolvers. And every evening, weather permitting, Delilah and Tobias still sat on the porch and watched the sunset together. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party. The whole community came, neighbors from miles around, people whose lives had been touched by Delilah and Tobias over the years. There was music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. William stood up to make a toast. His own children gathered around him. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd, "who taught us that strength is not just about knowing how to fight, but knowing when to love. Who showed us that a partnership built on respect and trust can weather any storm. who proved that the best adventures are the ones we take together. Everyone raised their glasses, and Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. Tobias squeezed her hand under the table. "When I think about my life," Delilah said later that evening when they finally had a moment alone, "I realize that all the fighting my father taught me, all those lessons about being strong and capable, they were not just about survival. They were about being ready. Ready for the moment when the right person came along, ready to recognize them, ready to build something with them." "Your father gave you a gift," Tobias said. "He gave you the strength to stand alone, which made it possible for you to choose to stand with someone. Not because you needed to, but because you wanted to. And you gave me a gift too," she said. "You showed me that being strong does not mean being alone, that accepting help, accepting love does not make me weak. We gave each other gifts," he said. "That is what love is. A constant exchange of gifts, of support, of partnership." Clara approached them then, leading a beautiful bay mare. "Mother, father, this is for you. I bred her specially. She is gentle enough for easy riding but spirited enough to still be fun. I thought you might enjoy having a horse you can ride together on those evening excursions you like to take." "She is beautiful," Delilah breathed, running her hand down the mare's neck. "Thank you, Clara," Tobias said, embracing his daughter. "She is perfect." That night, after all the guests had left and the house was quiet, Delilah and Tobias lay in bed together, exhausted but happy. 30 years, Delilah said wonderingly. "It has gone by so fast." "And yet every moment feels precious," Tobias replied. "I remember things from our early days together as clearly as if they happened yesterday. The way you looked the first time I saw you, the moment I knew I loved you, the day you agreed to marry me. I remember the first time you kissed me," Delilah said. "The night we sat on the porch and you told me you were falling in love with me. The moment our first child was born and I saw the look on your face. All the best moments of my life have been with you," he said simply. They drifted off to sleep, and in their dreams they were young again, standing in the New Mexico sun, testing each other, learning each other, beginning their journey together. The final years of their life together were peaceful. They stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, leaving that to William and Daniel, who had proven themselves more than capable. They spent their days doing the things they loved. Riding out into the desert on the mare Clara had given them, teaching their great-grandchildren to shoot and ride, sitting on the porch in the evening watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for so many years. Tobias passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Delilah holding his hand. She woke in the early morning to find him gone, his face peaceful, a slight smile on his lips as if he was dreaming of something pleasant. She did not cry, not at first. She simply held his hand and looked at the face she had loved for over 35 years, memorizing every line, every feature. "Thank you," she whispered to him. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for every moment we had together." She sat with him until the sun rose, until her children came and found them, until it was time to let him go. Only then did she finally cry, great racking sobs that shook her whole body. But even in her grief, she felt gratitude. Gratitude for the time they had had, for the life they had built, for the love that had sustained them both. The funeral was well attended, with people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects. Tobias had been a respected man, known for his fairness, his skill with cattle and horses, his devotion to his family. But more than anything, people spoke of his love for Delilah, how everyone who knew them had been inspired by their partnership, their devotion to each other. Delilah lived for another 5 years after Tobias passed. She remained active and engaged with her family, but everyone could see that a part of her had gone with her husband. She spent much of her time on the porch, in the spot where she and Tobias had spent so many evenings together, staring out at the desert horizon as if she could see him there in the distance. Clara moved into the main house to keep her company, and Delilah was grateful for her daughter's presence. They would sit together in the evenings, and Delilah would tell Clara stories about the early days, about meeting Tobias, about their adventures together. "He was the love of my life," Delilah said one evening as they watched the sunset. "I never thought I would find someone like him. I thought I would spend my life alone on this ranch, fighting to keep it going. But then he rode up, and everything changed." "Tell me again about the day you met," Clara asked. Though she had heard the story dozens of times, Delilah smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "3 men were threatening me, trying to get me to sell the ranch. Your father appeared out of nowhere, like something out of a dream. He stood up for me without even knowing me. And then later, after he helped me fix the fence, I challenged him to show me what he knew. We fought hand to hand, and I put him on his back in the dirt." "And he fell in love with you right then," Clara said. "He said he did," Delilah replied. "And I fell in love with him too, though I did not realize it until later. There was something about him, something honest and good and real. I knew I could trust him, and that trust grew into the deepest love I have ever known." Delilah passed away peacefully on a warm spring evening, sitting in her chair on the porch, watching the sun set over the desert she had called home her entire life. Clara was with her, holding her hand, and William and Daniel arrived just in time to say goodbye. "I see him," Delilah said with her last breaths, her eyes focused on something her children could not see. "He is waiting for me. My cowboy is waiting." She smiled, squeezed Clara's hand one last time, and was gone. They buried her next to Tobias on a hill overlooking the ranch, the place where they had both wanted to be laid to rest. The entire community came to say goodbye, 3 generations of people whose lives had been touched by Delilah Carson Sullivan. At her funeral, William spoke about his mother's strength, her courage, her fierce love for her family and her land. Clara spoke about her independence, her determination, her refusal to be anything less than exactly who she was. Michael spoke about her kindness, her generosity, her willingness to support his dreams even when they took him far from home. And Daniel spoke about her love for his father, about the example their parents had set for all of them about what a true partnership looked like. After the funeral, the family gathered at the ranch house one more time. The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled every room, just as Delilah and Tobias had always hoped. The house was full of noise and life and love, exactly as it had been when Delilah and Tobias were alive. William stood in the main room, looking at the gun case his father had built so many years ago. He read the placard again, the one his mother had added to commemorate their story. She learned to fight from her father's teachings. The cowboy said, "Show me what you know." And in showing him, she found love. "It is a good story," Sarah said softly, coming to stand beside her husband. "It is our family story," William replied. "The story of how this all began, how 2 people met by chance and built something that would last for generations." He looked around the room at his siblings, his children, his grandchildren. He saw his parents in all of them. Clara had her mother's fire and independence. Michael had his father's gentleness and artistic soul. Daniel had the combination of both strong and practical, but also deeply emotional. And his own children carried those same traits forward, a legacy of strength and love that would continue long after they were all gone. "They were lucky to find each other," Sarah said. "No," William corrected gently. "They were brave enough to choose each other. There is a difference. The world is full of people who might be right for us, but it takes courage to recognize them, to trust them, to build a life with them. That is what my parents did." They chose each other every single day for over 35 years. As the family began to disperse, heading back to their own homes and lives, William walked out to the porch one last time. He looked out at the desert, at the land his grandparents had homesteaded, his parents had expanded, and he and his siblings now managed. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red and purple. He imagined he could see them, his mother and father, riding out into the sunset together on that mare Clara had given them, side by side as they had always been. He imagined he could hear his mother's laughter, his father's low voice, the sound of two people so perfectly matched that even death could not truly separate them. "Thank you," he whispered to the evening air, to his parents' memory, to the legacy they had left behind. "Thank you for showing us what love looks like. Thank you for teaching us to be strong, to be brave, to choose each other every day. Thank you for this land, this family, this life." The wind picked up, warm and gentle, carrying the scent of sage and creosote, and William could almost believe it was his parents' way of responding, of letting him know they were at peace, together again at last. He turned and went back inside, back to his family, back to the life his parents had made possible. And as he closed the door behind him, the last light of sunset glinted off the guns in the case, off the placard with its simple inscription, off the legacy of love that would live on in that house, on that land, for generations to come. The story of a woman who learned to fight and a cowboy who challenged her to show what she knew. The story of two people who found in each other the perfect partner, the perfect match, the perfect love. The story of Delilah and Tobias Sullivan, whose love had been tested by the harshness of the desert, the difficulties of life on the frontier, and the simple passage of time, and had emerged stronger, deeper, and more beautiful with every challenge they faced together. It was a love story for the ages, a Wild West romance that had started with a challenge and ended only when death parted them. And even then, everyone who knew them believed they were together still, riding out into eternal sunsets, hand in hand, heart to heart, forever.